Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your Vistage Emerging Leaders meeting, our first virtual session at this. I would ask everyone to mute themselves. Maybe I think I can mute everybody, and to use the chat box to ask questions so that your mutes don't bother everyone. Now, can you hear me? Did I just mute myself?
No, I just went ahead and muted folks for you, but you're good.
Good. Our speaker today is Dave Collins. He was going to be our speaker in May, but I wanted to get him early because I thought his topic was so appropriate for this this time right now. His background is he's a nationally recognized trainer, facilitator, speaker, and improv guy, which I thought could be useful since it seems like we have to improv our lives on a daily basis. He's the founder and CEO of Oaks and Reeds, which offers practical business training to clients including Lyft, CBRE, PayPal, the Kellogg School of Management, and more. Previously, he was at StubHub, where he focused on building communication strategies to improve the ticket seller experience. He was a strategic consultant at AECOM Strategy Plus, where he developed workplace strategy, change management, and virtual collaboration services for government, technology, and university clients. So please welcome, virtually, to New York City, Dave Collins.
Hello. All right, Mark, thanks so much for the great intro, and thanks everyone for being here. As you can see, it's dark out here. I'm in Oakland, California, so I've got my coffee and I've got my water, and I'm really excited to present to you today. As Mark mentioned, my background is kind of twofold. I started my career as a change management expert, and so a lot of what we did was actually remote work development. So it's funny now that that's sort of all coming back to the fore right now in terms of leading these communication workshops virtually and remotely, but also leading remote workshops about remote working and dealing with this type of change that we're all going through. So it all kind of mushes together. Everything circles back in terms of experience. Today's workshop is all about leading teams through change. So obviously there's been a lot of change that's gone on over the past few weeks, and really, if we're being honest with ourselves, over the past few months. And what I'm gonna do today is we have about 2 hours. We're gonna move very quickly. And what I wanna teach you are some really simple and strategic tools that you can use to guide individuals and teams through change. The first half is all about thinking about individuals on your team, meeting with them where they are. And the second half, we're gonna talk about leading groups through change. Now, typically, I always ask at the beginning of these workshops, start to think about a change that you are going through or a change that your team is preparing to go through. I have not had to struggle very much to ask people to come up with a change recently as I'm doing these workshops. So if you want to think about, everyone going to work remotely, other changes that have happened relative to this global pandemic that we're dealing with, I would recommend pick a small part of it, whatever you want to focus on today. Treat this as a preparation session for you to start using these tools immediately after this workshop. That's my goal. So think of something real. We'll start applying them to the tools we're talking about. We're going to get a lot out of this workshop today. So again, my background is around interactive training. So I started a business called Oak and Reeds, where we do training on communication skills, collaboration skills, remote working skills. We do a lot of work with interviewers as well. And we work with clients all over the country and actually all over the world. So I'm really interested to hear from you today about the industries you're in and your experiences. But if you're working in a field that requires you to work with people and lead teams, these tools are going to be useful for you. They're pretty much industry and role agnostic. They've been applied for years and are proven to work. So I'll skip a little bit about me. I always like to put extra info on my bio because I find bios to be a little bit boring and kind of stodgy sometimes. So happy to talk about any of these topics as well. But I think the critical one is my background in change management today and also the remote work program design. So I'm happy to answer questions on either of those because I think both that change and the change to remote work are something we probably want to dig our hands into a lot today. So here's our focus for the workshop. I highlighted this a little bit early on, but here's what I'd like to do. I want to start by looking at the emotional arc of change. So this is the change curve that many of you may be familiar with. And I'd love it if you could open up the group chat, because we're going to be using that throughout the workshop today to get instant reactions. So have people heard of the change curve? Type Y or N if you have heard of it or haven't heard of it. I'm curious to get a quick little temperature check on that. All right, we've got a couple. Kind of balance, some yeses, some nos. Yes, the J curve, exactly. Yeah, Mark and I spoke about that last week. All right, so this seems to be new for some folks, which is great. We're going to introduce it from the beginning and do an exercise on that right at the beginning. Then we're going to talk about in the second half, after we take a brief break, we're going to look at change communications. So looking at some of the variables that help drive a successful or help submarine an unsuccessful change. We can kind of break down a change into 4 critical variables and look at how you communicate with your team on each of those 4 variables to help increase the likelihood of success. So that's what we're going to look at second. And then eventually we're going to end this whole workshop looking at applications. So throughout, I'm going to talk about how you can use these tools, but I'm going to end with a little bit of discussion. I really want to hear from you. Which of these tools make the most sense to you? Which of these tools do you think are most applicable? And most importantly, how are you going to implement them right away? I really want us to get at understanding how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to do some of this. So the one thing I really want to encourage, because this is a virtual workshop and virtual workshops have their own set of challenges, is that I want us to have this mindset of step up, step back. And by that, I mean, if you're the type of person that likes to, talk, loves to hear the sound of your own voice, typically likes to dominate conversations, this is an opportunity for you to maybe take a step back and allow some of the other people who are a little bit quieter, a little bit more reserved, or maybe struggle chiming in on a Zoom call for whatever reason, give them an opportunity to step up and have their voice heard. I'm going to do my best as a moderator to make sure we're hearing from everyone. So on that note, it would be really helpful if you could change your name on Zoom. You hit that little ... in the blue box in the top right, and just put your name in instead of a screen name or a phone number. That way I can call on people and actually know who's who. It's a little tough for me because I don't know all your faces yet. So that'll make it easy for me to facilitate and make sure we call on people and have a really rich discussion. So if that sounds good, if that approach sounds good, just give me a thumbs up so I know that you're with me. We're going to take care of each other on the Zoom call. All right. So let's jump in. Now, I want to do a quick little check-in. Now, I'm not sure what, Mark, happened before as we were warming up. Did you do a check-in at all? Or
we did a check-in and broke them into breakout groups, and you can look into the group chat and you can see some of the things that they want to get out of today
cool.
When you get a chance.
So let's do this. I want to hear, did we go over goals in that warm-up?
We did not.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes to do a breakout right now. We're going to go to groups of 3. I would love it if you could discuss the following things. If you've already checked in on something that's on your mind, or something that is something on your mind personally, professionally, that's fine. You can skip that. But I'd love for you to chat in for about 5 minutes with your group of 3. What's the impact that recent changes due to the pandemic, what's the impact that those changes have had on your team, right? I want to start with impact. So thinking about remote work, thinking about process change, thinking about customer change, thinking about even if it's personal change, like change to your daily rhythm, change to your habits, all that stuff is ripe for discussion today. I'd love it if you could discuss one impact it's had on you as a way to get to your goal for the day. So I want everyone to come out of this quick 5-minute discussion. What's your objective for this next 2 hours? What do you want to take away from this class? And then I'm going to have you type that into the chat box after we come back so I can get a sense of what people want to get out of today so I can make sure I'm giving that to you as a facilitator. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop you into breakout rooms right now.
Can you do that or you want me to?
I'm not seeing my ability to do that. If you make me host, I can.
Or I could do it. I'll just...
Yeah, just groups of 3 would be great.
Okay, you're going to go into breakout rooms.
All right, I skipped that.
All right, Kate, are you with me? All right, she joined.
Cool. And Mark, if you wouldn't mind making me the full host, I think it'll be logistically easier. I can pop people in and out with the breakout.
Okay. Let's see if I can do that. Matt, are you in a breakout room? I don't know that he's with us.
Okay.
Manage participants. Make host.
Perfect. Okay. Yep. Now I'm great because I want to be able to. I can't jump into the different rooms unless I have that ability. So I'm gonna.
All right. So now I can't, right?
I can move you to different rooms. Yeah.
I see. I don't know if you want to take a quick look at the chat we had earlier.
So I don't have visibility into that because I wasn't online.
Ah. So if I go into the chat, I'll just read what people said they wanted to get out of the day earlier to determine to learn strategies on communicating through the difficult changes we are making while keeping the team engaged and maintaining our culture, to continue to support my team through this and make sure I'm communicating effectively with them, to accomplish everything I set out to do today. What are the best practices for communicating change to an organization? What are the right cadences? What should be communicated? How to deal with this change, learn constructive ways to prioritize the strategic efforts that will build our brand for the long term while deflecting the tactical work that seems urgent but not important.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just jump in really quickly to some of the rooms and check in, and then I'm going to come back and bring us all together.
All right, sounds good. Can't hear you.
It always mutes me on the entry. We're closing up the rooms and then we're gonna keep moving.
Look at, he's drinking beer on the beach.
All right, we're welcoming people back and we're gonna get started in just a moment. We got 8 seconds before everyone is rudely kicked out of their breakout rooms automatically. All right, welcome back everyone. I wanna keep this conversation moving. First with a little bit of a PSA, I wanna make sure everyone has access to the workbook, which I just put in the Google chat. If you don't have access to the document sent ahead of time, you can always access the workbook through this link on Google Docs. It's available as view only, and it'll help you work through some of the exercises we're doing today. I'd love to hear from people right now what your objective is for the day. You know, 2 questions basically. I'd love it if everyone could type their goal into the chat box. I know some of you have did that already, so if you already done that, just for my sake, go ahead and copy paste it and put it right back in. Let us know what your one key objective is for this workshop. I'd love to see that in the chat. And then if someone would like to unmute themselves and share, what do you want to get out of today? I'm really curious to hear that. And I think a lot of people have some overlap. So if you weren't in that person's breakout room, it might be nice to see that you have some similarities in terms of what you want to take away and what you're thinking about as it relates to change. So would someone like to volunteer? Who would like to share?
I'll share. It's Jen. Mine was really, and I think there quite a few of us can relate to this, but managing my roles as a human in my life as they all collide together, and how to manage that. And I was talking to Elise, and we were discussing how we have different personas. You know, I have my work persona, my mom persona, and now that they've all collided, and I'm trying to manage through it all, as well as be a homeschool teacher, and as well as do my job full time, and be expected to probably put even more into it now, and just how to manage all that as I feel like the world is also coming down on us. So it's heavy, I think, and it's for me trying to figure out these roles and in a new way, in that new norm.
I think that's common, and I think that's so thank you for sharing first. And I think the idea of we wear those hats in normal life, and now all those hats, we have to balance them on our head simultaneously, and without much of a break and without much of a distinction between when you're, you know, at work self versus home self versus teacher self. And those can all happen within a sequence of 5 minutes of each other now. We don't have those boundaries to allow us the transition times, which we need as people. So I think that's a really, really good insight. And when we're talking about the first part, about the change curve, I think that would be a really good moment to think about maybe where you sit on any given point, because you could be in a different place for all those different roles, and that's okay. I'm seeing some really great goals in the group chat, you know, staying positive, looking at balancing with kids and a baby and a toddler at home. And what does it look like? How do we replicate a closed door in a virtual work environment? Elise, I love that one. Could you expound on that a little bit more? What do you mean by the closed door in a virtual work environment?
Sure. So I feel like in this new working world, I'm in more meetings than I am when I'm in the office. So we had done all this great work in Vistage on how to create boundaries and make sure that we're getting our balance, getting work done with our management, or what is the term I'm looking for? Responsibilities. Yeah. But because we're trying to increase communication and make ourselves available to the team emotionally during this really difficult time, I almost think this has been a phased, because of coronavirus, there's almost been phases to it where we had to mourn everybody who we laid off. Then we had to kind of scramble, since we can't proactively sell, what are projects that we're working on with the staff that remains. And now everybody's gotten used to being on Zoom calls all day long, but I actually need to get the work done that we're doing in the Zoom meetings. And so I don't have an actual office door to close to signify I'm getting things done. How do I replicate that so that I can actually get the projects done and move things forward?
Yeah, no, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that too. Our Zoom meetings now have become overwhelming in some cases, where we are meeting so much more with good intention and healthy intention to make sure we're connecting, make sure we're empathizing, we're there for people dealing with different challenges. But as a leader, you still need blocked off time to think. And how do we find that? I think we'll explore some of that as we go throughout this workshop today. I think part of it is realizing you yourself are going through a change. And so being honest with yourself that there are certain times where you need to have an emotional reaction. You need to mourn a little bit. You need to maybe get angry a little bit. And it's okay for you to ask for help on some of those from someone else as well, and not just be the only giver on some of these topics. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's keep going. We've got everyone's in the chat, which I really appreciate. We're going to come back to these goals at the end of the day today and think about how much we moved towards them. So I'm not just doing it for an exercise sake. I do want to hold you accountable and make sure that you're getting what you need. And also you're asking of me if you have questions along the way. Happy to answer questions. Just raise your hand or chime in on the chat. Say, hey, I've got a question. We'll pause and we'll keep moving. All right, otherwise, let's just jump into the content, unless anyone has any questions right off the bat on logistics or what we're talking about today or where we're going from here. All right, did I see a hand there? No. Okay, let's keep going. So let's start our first topic, which is about the change curve. So I saw in the chat, we've got a couple people familiar with this change curve, but it seems like it's relatively new to a lot of people. So I'm really excited to introduce this idea. The change curve is essentially the emotional states that people in general go through anytime they're faced with a change. And the way it works is it is essentially a graph of how your motivation, your morale, your emotional state is, which is on the vertical axis, over time. That's on our x-axis. So this moves left to right. And what the change curve is kind of an older term, it's older thought, and there's a lot of different versions. You can call this the J curve, you can call it the change curve. This is also a stages of mourning curve, which can apply to loss or death as well. But this is really thinking about change as it relates to workplace and organizations and how people deal with changes in general. So pretty much most changes start with stage one, which is shock and denial. So it's an initial reaction that this is not real, this is not happening. And usually there's not much change in behavior or emotional state. As you can see, relatively speaking, you're kind of in the middle of your motivation performance graph, right? This is our starting point. Typically when a large scale change happens, whether it's a reorg, whether it is, a large scale global pandemic that's going to require us to work from home all the time, people tend to react initially that's saying, this is not going to affect me. I'm still going to operate the same. My life really isn't going to be affected. It's that initial shock and denial. Now, that can last 5 minutes. It can last weeks, right? But typically what happens next is we move into stage two, which is anger, frustration. We start to think about who's to blame. Whose fault is it that, in the case of a reorg, whose fault is it that our team maybe was underperforming and had to get broken up? In the case of this larger scale change, whose fault is it that we didn't respond quickly enough? So there's blame, and also it could be self-critical. What did I do wrong, right? What is my role in this change? How might I be at fault? And then often this frustration will start to brew. This is such a big undertaking. I don't have the ability. I'm not going to have the resources to do this. Whoever the they is, what leadership, what the government, what colleagues are asking for is impossible. I'm not going to be able to do this. And this is where a lot of the highest levels of stress can come in, because you're fighting this urge. You're not quite fully wrapped your arms around this change, but you're starting to feel anger. I know personally myself, I went through this stage too in regards to kind of social distancing and stay-at-home mandates 2 weeks ago, because I'm in California. It kind of started a little earlier. And I woke up one day feeling this anger, right? And so it was honest, because I literally teach the change curve. I was thankfully able to understand that this is necessary, but it doesn't mean that it didn't feel bad and awkward and terrible and just grating feeling. So you're kind of following down this curve as you make your way to stage 3, which is confusion and depression. And this is typically the lowest point in a change curve, where you are now, as you can see on this chart, you are at your lowest level of motivation and performance. This is where people really start to question their role, question their abilities. And this is where they typically have the least understanding of how to get out of here, of where the vision is, what the next steps are. You know, this is the I don't want to get out of bed moment. This is the why even show up to work moment. This is the I don't even want to talk to anyone, leave me alone moment of depression and lack of understanding of how you're going to get out of this. Thinking thoughts like my role is pointless, no one's listening to me, there aren't any solutions. And again, your job here, we're going to talk about how you provide coaching to people at each of these stages. Your job differs depending on where you are and where the people on your team are on this curve. And I think the goal ultimately of being a change leader is to minimize the amount of time you and your people spend in this stage 3 of confusion and depression. You can't force people to skip it, because that's not going to work, because they still have to go through this morning, but you can minimize the amount of time they spend in that I don't even want to show up anymore moment. And that's great change leadership, is to give them the coaching they need, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, to move them through this so they don't wallow in stage 3. I'll pause here for a moment. Does this make sense? These first 3 steps of this dealing with change. Yeah, does anyone felt like they've gone through these? Yeah, I see from Thomas saying yes. Has anyone gone through some of these already? You can just give me a nod or a digital thumbs up. I feel like we'll get to some examples. I want to hear from some people, but I think we're in such a unique time right now with these changes that a lot of us may be in stage 2 or stage 3. I'm not going to ask you to share, exactly how you feel, because that's a tough one to share in a group setting, but it's normal and real, right? So it's our role both as leaders to understand this and to meet people where they are. Okay, so let's keep moving. I want to talk about how we pull ourselves out of this before we're going to get into our first exercise, where we're going to think about mapping some people to this curve. So stage 4 is when you start to pull out of this depth. And stage 4 is what's called acceptance. As you can see, stage 4, you're still not mentally or emotionally above where you started, right? So you're still below that first starting point. You're still not feeling great. But what the nice part about acceptance is you flip your vision. You flip your thought process to from mourning the past to accepting what's happening and thinking towards the future. This is the critical shift that happens at stage 4, where you're no longer bemoaning all the things you've lost. You understand they're gone, and you're starting to think about, where do I go from here? You don't have solutions yet, right? You're not there yet. That's the subsequent stage. But you start to think about testing some ideas. You start to dip your toe in the water, and you start thinking thoughts like, okay, this is happening. This is real. I'm at home. My team is fully remote, let's say. I might as well start to figure out something new. I need to figure out, let's say, for example, how are we going to do our weekly team meetings virtually in a way that's useful and functional and not just trying to replicate the old ways, right? You maybe haven't completed any ideas yet, but you're starting to think towards them. Stage 5 is where things start to really get nice. And you can see here, stage 5 is where you're actually starting to crest over where you started, and you're starting to feel empowerment. So stage 5 is all about problem solving. Stage 5 is really about feeling empowered to own some of these changes and feeling empowered to do things in a new way that are going to be even more effective than they were previously. This is why this curve ultimately will exit us at a higher level than when we started. Something I think that is really important about this moment is this idea of reframing. And reframing, I'm curious, is anyone here familiar with this idea of reframing? Does anyone want to take a shot at describing it for the group? I see some heads nodding down there. What does reframing mean? Who'd like to take a shot at that? No one?
I mean,
All
are you
right.
talking about in terms of the context of the problem? Like
Yeah.
reframing what the issue is?
Go ahead, Greg. Yeah, I just cut you off.
Okay. Is it more like reframing what the actual issue is? Like at the heart of the problem? Not that you can't meet, but now you're forced to meet a different way?
Yeah, I think, it's a funny chat. I think everyone is stepping back. So we're seeing a great example of a book in the top here, The Art of Framing, Managing the Language of Leadership. Mark, do you want to chime in on what your understanding of reframing is? Because I think Greg led us there a little bit.
I mean, for me, I think it's coming up with a different perspective, and a perspective that creates new possibilities rather than a perspective that is going to have the impact of making me more depressed or angry.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this idea of thinking of the change now as an opportunity to do something new rather than a battle to fight to defend the old is really what reframing looks like in a change context. Now, what's kind of wild about this idea is the mere thought of reframing a change in this way, if you're in stage 2 or 3, would seem ridiculous. But you have to go through that emotional journey to get to stage 5, and the eyes you now have on the same exact problem are totally different because you've powered through this and you've had that acceptance, and you're now starting to be able to think creatively. So what this looks like when people are in stage 5, because we're trying to think about how do I identify where the people on my team are right now. People are taking on new ideas, taking on new responsibilities. People are saying things like, I get how this new process is going to make me more productive. Saying things like, I understand now that working from home can actually I can let go of some of the annoying things about being in the office, about commuting, about, having to travel from room to room. I talked about this yesterday on a call. We don't have to worry about booking conference rooms anymore to have a meeting, right? Little things like that start to get us thinking, okay, well, if we don't need a conference room, I know we don't need to book it. Do our meetings have to happen in the same way, right? Does a 3-hour planning meeting have to happen all at once? Could we split that up? I was talking to a fellow workshop facilitator yesterday. He does these big construction strategic planning offsites with 25 people. It takes a day and a half. And I was trying to help him think through, it doesn't have to all happen at once. You could spread that out over 10 days, right? Because you don't have people traveling. Just like this workshop today, for me, ordinarily I would get on a plane, I would go to New York, I'd get a hotel, I'd get a Lyft or an Uber to the site. All I have to do now is wake up early and get in front of my computer and make sure I'm at least presentable from the waist up, right? So starting to think about what are these new opportunities given that this is real. And then finally, we get to stage 6, which is the new normal. And this can often be a little scary too, because we look backwards and think, wow, we've come a long way. And I didn't realize that this would just become normal happenstance. What's important about this stage of the new normal is that's when you record all of the things you've learned, because then you can look back on those the next time you go through a change and remind yourself that eventually you get through this curve. So it's a really good opportunity to have a debrief with your team, with individuals, and talk about how they got themselves through this curve so that the next time they're faced with this, you have that information and you can even coach them even more effectively on a personal level, reminding them of the things that allowed them to level up from one stage to the next. And so you start to see people saying things like, oh, I could never imagine going back to the old way of doing things. I could never imagine having to, and this, again, going back to this remote work change, which I'll use as an example throughout, I could never imagine having to go into the office 5 days a week during our normal hours, right? I could never imagine having to fight to book a conference room to get our 8-person meeting a space to connect. Or I could never, for me, I could never imagine getting on a plane every single week to go and give a talk when the virtual sessions are working, right? So starting to think about how everything has kind of come together in a new way and solidifying some of those changes and new processes. So in order to get us into our next exercise, I want to ask us in a quick chat poll. Feel free to, if I want to hear from everyone on this one. So where do you think you are as it relates to the change to working from home and 100% remote work? So not coming into the office. Which stage would you say you are in right now? And again, you can move backwards and forwards through this. Sometimes a day we may be in acceptance. Sometimes we may fall back into confusion and depression. We may still be fighting it on the anger wise, or maybe we're even kind of think we're past through it. And I'm starting to see some numbers in here. Looks like we've got some 4s and 5s, some 3s. Again, there's not a right answer. You can still be operating at a high level, even if you're still struggling through some of the early stages. All right, we see some 3s and 4s. I love the new normal. Okay, so Andreas is saying loves the no commute. I'm with you on that. I think that is huge. And that's one of the reasons I think remote work is really going to stick around. A lot of 4s, seems like, and a couple of people feeling 3. So I'd love to hear from some folks right now. Someone who said that they were a 4, who is in acceptance. How would you map yourself there? Like, how did you get from 3 out of 4? And what are you feeling right now in that stage 4?
In our group, it's okay if you want to call on people, Dave.
Okay, yeah, let's call in some folks. How about Joe? Joe, what do you think? What stage are you in, and how'd you get out of the previous one?
I would say 5 now. I'm in the physical therapy industry along with 3 other members here. And so we're used to being in contact in person with everyone. And that was very much a big part of our job, especially running around to each clinic every day. So working from home was a totally new thing for all of us. And I think we did a really good job of innovating quickly. And over the past 2 weeks, I think we accepted that. And now we're in this stage of problem solving. How do we close this gap from being in the clinic to not being in the clinic? What are the new systems and processes? What are the new problems we're trying to solve? And Zoom has done a lot of that just by being able to have that personal interaction, especially just not over the phone. So I definitely think that I'm in that problem solving stage and just trying to think and how can we continuously innovate.
That's exciting. Would you say, I'll follow up with that, would you say you think the majority of your colleagues are with you in stage 5, or are there maybe some folks who are behind or ahead?
I think the majority are with us. I think we are still working on that acceptance from a therapist level, the ones who are still going into the clinic versus working from home.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing. Let's hear from someone else. What stage are you in, and how did you get to there from the previous one? What changed for you?
So Amir was talking about this earlier, because I think one of the challenges in communication is that you're talking to people that may be at grief and they're not ready to start speculating on new possibilities. You want to expand on that, Amir?
Yeah, sure. I think I was discussing, yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Sorry. I was mentioning to the team that we as a group, I'm with Joe and the other 2 people in this room, that in the past 21 years or so, we've gone from 1 clinic to 20 clinics, and a majority of that happened in the past 4 or 5 years. So we've been in the conversation of change for that whole time. It's been positive change from our perspective as executives in the company, but not everyone has seen or viewed it that way along the way. And we've had to have different chats, and some folks have left the company because of the change and all that. And how it pertains and how the conversations change to today's economy and world is that I think the 4 of us in this room and all the executives in our company have gone through this curve in advance of the rest of the company. So we're further along it. And, the one example I gave was the questions we were fielding specifically from the physical therapists were, like a lot of companies, we've had to either lay people off temporarily or furlough or make comp adjustments or change the way comp is being done, right? Whether it's salary to hourly, those kinds of things. Because we were part of the planning process, we were in acceptance of it before communicating it, so that the people who were receiving the information were going through shock, denial, anger, and frustration while we were further along. Yeah. And it's just challenging to get on their level and be with them where they are, especially after you've done it a bunch of times. The more you do it, the more sort of jaded or comfortable you get with it. And I noticed that even with the layoffs, the conversation was really hard at first, and then number 2, 3, 4, and 5 and subsequent layoffs were easier, which is really kind of a cynical thing to say, but it was hard to reproduce the emotion and the sincerity along that message as it got further along the process. We laid off almost 150 people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think that idea that you had right there at the end, especially around reproducing the emotion to match where people are, especially if you're in layoffs, I would argue that you don't have to reproduce that emotion. That's going to become ultimately really draining to kind of drum up those feelings every time. So what I want to talk about right now is in lieu of meeting them and matching them on an emotional level, what kind of coaching can you provide people so that you don't have to fire up those emotions every time to match them? You can, again, be a leader, be a few steps ahead of them on the curve, but still provide them what they need in that moment, which differs. So that's a really great comment to kind of transition us into what do you do, right, to coach and meet people when they're at these different stages of the curve. Because it's one thing to understand where they are. It's another thing, and probably a more important thing, to understand what do they need at these different stages, because it differs widely, right? So you're going to become a really much more powerful and focused change leader if you meet them where they are, understand where they are, you're able to map them where they are, and then provide them the information that they need at that particular stage. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to walk through these and talk about how do you coach people at these different stages. So for the first 2 stages, what's really needed when an individual on your team is in the shock or even in the anger and frustration stage, those initial early negative pushback reactions, what they need is context and clarity. This is the moment for clear, precise information. So you want to share any sort of background information you have, research you've done, risk analysis, why these plans are put in place, how you came to this decision, what you know about the current situation. That's what's most important in these first few stages. What's interesting about these is it's not about matching their anger or validating their anger. You're not there yet. What you want to do is provide them information so that they can start to sort through the reality of what's happening right now, right? So this is like in the larger context of the world right now, thinking about getting real information about this disease, right? Getting information about how it's spread, getting information about what you need to do around social distancing and what you need to do around working from home. So for your teams, it's like, make sure you have your homework set up, right? You need these items. You're going to need to log in at this time. You're going to need these credentials, right? The facts only at this stage. From there, what you want to do in the next phase, which is really the critical phase where leaders can either succeed or fail in a change process, is dealing with folks in stage 3 in that dark depths of confusion and depression and helping them get out of 3 into 4. This is where you are most useful and most important. And it's also where a lot of leaders really fail, because at stage 3, you want to provide emotional support. Save that emotional support after the anger is done, right? You don't want to just validate and yes and their anger. You want to be there as the person to talk to in stage 3. Save that emotional support for that depression stage. Because what you're doing here is you're listening, you're reassuring them, you're providing that emotional support. What's critical here is you're not problem solving yet. And this is the critical thing I want to leave you with. A lot of leaders mess this up because they try to problem solve when the person is still in stage 3 confusion and depression. They're not going to hear you. They're not going to be creatively inspired to think about owning some of these solutions because they're not at the stage that you are. A lot of leaders may find themselves in problem solving, dealing with a lot of team members who are still in confusion and depression, and there's a disconnect there. And that can create a lot of frustration. So what you want to do here is start to sell them and kind of get them excited about what the opportunities and possibilities are without dumping too much new stuff on their plate. It's a fine balance here, but if you can minimize just a couple of days, a couple percentage points, the amount of time people are spending in confusion and depression, you're really going to get them to skyrocket out of stage 3 and into the more productive stages. Another thing to note here is it's common and reasonable for people to oscillate between stage 4 and stage 3. You may have one day where someone's feeling okay, acceptance, and then the next day something happens, something throws them off, and then they're back at stage 3. And so to one of the person's point earlier who talked about, balancing lots of different types of, it was Jen who talked about different types of hats and roles that she's wearing. One of those roles could be in a great place and something could happen that affects the other role, right? So maybe something happens at home that affects where you are work-wise or vice versa. And I think that's common too, because we may be proceeding in different speeds with the different hats we're wearing. So I'm curious, for someone on the call, I want to hear from you on this one. How have you coached or provided that emotional support for people on your team who are feeling stage 3, confused, depressed? What specific things have you done in the last couple of weeks to help people get out of that stage 3 into acceptance? Here, let's hear from BJ. What have you done with your team to help folks who are kind of feeling down?
This is my first week at home. For everybody else, I stayed in the office last week, and just getting everybody set up at home was really getting them comfortable to be able to do what they were doing normally. It's really the hardest part, and everybody's, and it's like you're not going to get 8 hours of work being at home. It's going to be different. And a couple of the breakout sessions we were talking about, you're working different hours now too. Yeah. As the work's coming in, or it's 6 or 7 o'clock at night after dinner, you're still checking email. But a lot of my team are like, I think we're still in the 2 and 3 right now because we're still new to being at home. So I'm just trying to make them as comfortable as possible and not have the number 5 yet. The owner of our company is pushing 5 right now hard. Yeah. Because you need something to happen now. So I'm like the middle guy trying to keep everybody at bay until we get to number 4.
Yeah, and I think that's tough when leadership above you is farther along and you're trying to play the middle person, right? And play buffer between your team who may be dragging a little bit, but being reasonable because it can take people different speeds here. When you're from one other person, Catherine, what have you done so far in helping folks through this stage 3, or maybe even earlier stages too? Oh, you're muted.
So yeah, I was going to say my team, I mean, we're very lucky that our jobs, like we pretty much already had the infrastructure in place for us to work remotely. So I don't think that there's too much stage 3 happening at this point. I think it was a pretty quick turnaround to acceptance and kind of getting into a groove. But I will say in the beginning, there was a lot more choppy waters around being allowed to work remotely in the first place. We kind of had a disconnect between our upper management and what the majority of our team felt was the right move, given, everything our government and the CDC was saying about social distancing. And there was a real push that, nope, they wanted everyone to go into the office. So I definitely had to play that middleman, and obviously I can't, you say, yeah, you're right, you know, management's wrong, you know, you kind of have to play the game a little bit. So, I mean, really all I could do is provide them with the facts of, you know, you can take PTO, you can come into the office, you know, just kind of outline what their options were, which I think helped maintain a little bit of the trust, because I was afraid that there would be some kind of emotional scarring from the way it was being handled. I just know my team is, you know, a little bit younger, a little bit more vulnerable. So just kind of navigating those waters, I think, was important upfront, and hopefully minimize the amount of time people spent being angry or frustrated.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of us feeling that push and pull from above and below in different directions, and kind of almost like your arms, you're holding on to someone who's in stage 4, someone who's in stage 1, and you're trying to link the distance in between them, kind of cross communication. That's really stressful, right? And you're also going on your own journey too. So it's important to acknowledge when that's happening, and you may, and again, this is my own kind of side comment, a lot of remote working, the challenge is not so much with the people working remotely, it's with managers managing the remote folks and being comfortable understanding how remote people need to be managed a little differently. So what I've been noticing with clients right now is there was a lot slower for upper level management to get through the shock and denial that the mere thought of everyone working remotely could even happen. But people along who are lower levels of the organization were already into, you know, figuring it out. So they maybe even sped over to level 4 and accepted, like, I'm going to be home tomorrow. What am I going to do? And it's always a weird thing when people at lower levels are farther along than upper level management. That's a strange position to be in on the change curve, because it's usually reversed. Because usually leadership has weeks or months to think about this change, and people are hearing it for the first time at the all hands meeting or in that big email memo. So it's, again, another thing that's very odd about the time we're in right now. So great comments. Let's keep moving, because I want us to get into the exercise where we're going to look at mapping some folks on this. The last stage for coaching is, what do you do in stages 5 and 6, right? Once people are out of this, starting to get that positive slope and feeling a lot better about new ideas and new creative options they have. So in stages 5 and 6, this is where being a change leader actually gets to be really fun, because what your job now is to provide direction and guidance and inspiration to allow people to think creatively and take ownership over the new opportunities they have to affect their operations, their day-to-day habits, the responsibilities they have on their plate now that they are starting to think creatively and problem solve how to live and work in this new world. So what you want to do is facilitate people to take ownership and make decisions on their own, right? Let go of some of all of the decision-making requirements and allow people to do it on their own. So what that can look like is hosting brainstorms, you know, information sharing sessions, problem solving activities where you take a little bit more of a hands-off approach and allow people to propose and solution their own ideas. It's really important also at that stage to avoid slippage and backsliding, to encourage test and learn. And what I mean by that is people are going to be trying things out for the first time here. You really want to reward process and exploration over immediate successful outcomes. Because the first time someone tries one of these new processes they've developed, they're probably not going to be very good at it. But you need to encourage them and provide positive reinforcement in those early stages as they're getting and learning a new skill, right? Just like I feel like a lot of us are probably, and again, I'm projecting here, but how many of us have had to teach a parent or a grandparent or a relative how to use Zoom in these last couple of weeks? Yeah, raise your hand if you've had to do that. I've had to teach many sessions like that. So again, that is essentially doing change management for our families, right? We're being patient with our moms, right? I have a particular mom, it takes a while for her to get something. She does it in her own way, but she gets there, right? So I can't just tell her how to use Zoom. I've got to help her figure out how to take ownership and do all those things, be a little bit of a teacher and allow her to test and learn in that way. So that's allowing a failure to occur, embracing failure, learning from mistakes, celebrating some of those mistakes, and also demonstrating how you yourself are learning from your own errors. So people feel okay bringing to you some of the errors they've made and not hiding them, because that's where things start to really get dark. So you want to start asking yourself, once you're getting through this problem solving stage, in that final debrief, however you choose to hold it, the big question there is asking every individual, what have you learned about yourself and your work by going through this change? Start to look backwards. You're at a higher level of motivation now that you're at stage 6. You're better than where you were before this whole thing started. So what did you learn about your own process? What did you learn about the team? What did you learn about how the organization either supported or did not support you? Maybe processes that worked or didn't work. And then how are you going to make sure that you remind yourself of those lessons the next time we go through this? Hopefully, knock on wood, there's not a next time we go through a global pandemic. I really hope so. But the next time something major like this happens and there's disruption, how are you going to remember some of these things that you've learned along the way as you've gone through this trauma? So I'm actually curious. I want to ask that question for some of the folks who have mapped themselves in stage 5 or even stage 6. What have you learned about yourself thus far through going through this gigantic change? And I may call on some folks here. So Julia, I'll call on you. What have you learned about yourself so far? And apologies, I don't know exactly what stage you mapped yourself to.
That's okay. I set a 4, but I could easily be a 5 on some days or some hours of the day. Before this all happened, I always worked from home on Fridays. So I had a little bit of an exposure to what that meant for me. I would plan out my week to have most of my in-person meetings Monday through Thursday. Fridays really became my working day. But with this situation, on one hand, it's been far easier to have meetings in a more regular fashion over Zoom when everyone is there. When it was just me from home or just a few people from home, I would Zoom into a conference room with people around a conference table, which was really tough to interact on a one-to-one level. But I love not having a commute, but I also miss not having that you mentioned earlier, that transition time, or that time to really sit and focus on the work. I have 3 little kids at home, and my husband's obviously working from home too. And so every time I'm not in a meeting, I feel like I need to be downstairs and checking in what's happening with, the schoolwork, what's happening. Is the TV still on? Why is it still on? Those kinds of, I'm very torn in that regard. But I'm also finding that given that this is a global health issue, my priorities are shifting. I'm really making sure my family is healthy and has what they need to eat throughout the day to be successful in the school, whatever level that is, right? Like, okay, do we have enough markers, right? Like those priorities are coming into focus a lot more during this. And so I'm enjoying exploring that part of me as well, but also trying to figure out the transition to the professional and the personal constantly.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that, Julia, because I think that idea of being torn is something a lot of us are feeling right now, whether you have kids, whether it's parents, whether it's partner, maybe it's colleagues you can't see. I use the term context switching. Mm-hmm. That for me is very draining. That's just my own learning and thinking style. I can do one thing really well, but if you start to add 2, 3, 4 things, my brain just fries. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are feeling the context. What do I look at? And it feels weird because just from a physical standpoint, you'd think there are fewer distractions when we're at home, right? But there are actually a lot more mental ones because we can't see and touch all the things that we're worried about. Yeah. And it's hard. It's a hard one. Let's do this. What I want to do is get us into our next exercise. So we're going to move to a breakout room right now, and you'll need your virtual workbook for this. So either use the Google Doc or the Word doc that was sent ahead of time. What I want to do right now is do a little change curve mapping. So here's what I want you to do. In a moment, I'm going to break you out into your breakout groups. And I want you to discuss the following things. I want you to share, and you can kind of just go around, around that circle, virtual circle. I want you to share with your group, where would you say you are right now on this change curve relative to the specific version of this change you want to talk about today, right? We're all kind of going through various changes, so be specific, right? Whether it's remote work, whether it's something with family, whether it's something related to personal life, you know, be a little specific. Where are you on this change curve right now? And then probably more importantly, with that change, and let's keep it to a work change for this one, where are the individuals on your team? And what I want you to do there is pick 3 critical people on your team, right? 3 of your critical colleagues that you work with all the time that are essential to your day-to-day success. Where do you think those 3 people are on this curve? No right or wrong answers. They may be in the same spot. They may be all over the place. But think about what is it you're noticing from them that gives you the evidence to put them at that spot. Again, you're guessing here, right? You're not in their brains, but you are observing behaviors. So it's important to be able to map people based on the observed behaviors we just talked about, right? Some of those quotes, the things they're saying, their mindset. And then for one of those people, again, there's kind of 3 parts to this exercise. Where are you? Where are the people on your team? And for one of those people, what specifically placed them there? And then what are you going to do to meet them where they are, right? We talked about the different styles of coaching you give to people where, depending on where they are in this curve, right? Information and context, emotional support, or problem solving and encouragement. So what are you going to do based on where they are to make sure they make it successfully to that next stage? It could just be 1 or 2 ideas, but think about what you know about them as a person and what you know about the stage they're in, and marry those 2 things for a specific idea about what you're going to do to coach them. All right. Questions on that? Does this make sense, what we're about to discuss in our groups? See some nods. I see some blank faces. That's good enough for me. All right. So I'm going to break us up into breakout rooms. So bear with me for a moment. And we're going to get you into those. All right, I'm gonna move. Okay. And it looks like we have everyone in groups of 3. Okay, perfect. All right, I've opened your rooms. And you can go ahead and join. We're gonna take about 10 minutes for this before we bring it back. We got a little time. Oh, you're muted, Mark.
Tom may have stepped away, looks like.
Okay. That's fine. It just looks like we have Ariana by herself. So I'm going to move her to another group.
I don't know who the 631 person is.
Okay. Yeah, I moved Ariana to a group of 4 so that Thomas can join when he is back. And Mark, I have you signed in as 2 people right now.
Yeah, I have 1 computer so I can see what's going on, what everyone else sees, and then
Smart.
Yeah, just a little tip somebody gave me in Zoom, so it helps.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea, and I'm gonna rename that one Mark Taylor too, just so I know.
All right, I think this is going well.
Good. Yeah, no, I think so too. People have some really, really good insights, and I appreciate the thought on just cold calling some folks. Keep it moving.
Yeah, they're just a little shy. They're not like the CEO groups.
Every group's different, so you always got to get a read in the first few minutes. All right.
We're gonna take a break soon.
Yeah, we're gonna, after this exercise, we're gonna take a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna debrief it, and then we'll move the second half. So we're basically right on time.
Great.
Cool. I can turn the heat on. It's cold in here. Okay. All right. I'm gonna hop into some of those rooms and see what people are up to.
All right. Hey, Thomas?
All right, I'm going to close up the breakout rooms and bring everyone back, and then we'll take a break.
All right, sounds good.
And just so temperature check, we're going to go until like 8:10 with content, and then we'll do the discussion, or sorry, 11:10, and then have the discussion until start around then, sort of the final debrief. Just want to make sure we're on the same page timing wise.
So you're saying we're going to go another hour?
Yeah, about another hour, and then the content portion will be done.
Yeah, I mean, we're good until noon. That's what they're expecting. So if it
Yeah.
ends a few minutes before or if we need that time, it's up to you.
Yeah, I want to leave a bunch of time at the end for debrief and discussion. So.
All right. Maybe Amir or Joe could lead us in a stretch, you know, a Zoom stretch. Do you think that's possible, Joe?
I think Dave should. Dave Block. He's a better therapist than me.
Well, let's do this. I think that's a great idea. But what we're going to do as people are coming back, really good work on that exercise. We're about to take a break right now. So go ahead. We're going to take about a 10-minute break. So I really would like people to come back at 22 past the hour. It's 7:22 on my end. It's 10:22 on your end. I would encourage you, take this break as a true break. Don't just check email for 10 minutes and come back. Get up, walk around, go outside, get some coffee, get some water, do what you need to do so we can come back focused. And then afterwards, I'd love it if we could do a stretch. If one of our physical folks could lead us there, I think that'd be awesome. So, all right, we'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
Yeah, Dave Block, he volunteered for that.
David Block did, huh?
David's got it.
Did you hear that, David? Amir volunteered you, and he's giving us the thumbs up, so we're good.
Good.
Do I have to put pants on then?
Classic Amir to delegate.
Yeah. And yeah, you should put pants on.
Yeah.
Master delegator.
You're on a different part of my screen now.
People move around a little bit, which is, I think, I haven't quite gotten a handle on how it decides who to put where.
I think it depends on if somebody leaves, it rearranges something. So,
yeah, that would make sense.
because I think we had 23 and now I see 22, so we may have lost somebody.
Yeah. Here, let me just adding a breakout room here.
But maybe they'll join back in. David, are you ready for our stretch? Pressure's on. You got bad lighting. You got the light behind you, so your face looks dark.
I can't figure out the lighting on my in my bedroom, but my wife, she's an occupational therapist. She's in our living room, good New York City apartment, and she's doing telehealth sessions right now, so I can't go into the lighted room.
My wife's in the living room on Zoom too.
I told her she has to talk quieter. All right, let me see if I can position this well. Okay. All right, we got 1 minute, right?
Yeah.
1 minute. Well, once we get everyone back here, I'll hand over the microphone to you and let's do a stretch.
You don't have to tell me twice. I got under control.
All right, 1 more minute in our break here as we're all coming back. All right, so it's 22 past the hour as I requested. Everyone's back pretty much, which I really do appreciate. Before we get going with our second half, let's do a stretch. David, why don't you take it away?
Julia, that was very sweet, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
All right, so we'll start since Amir so kindly chimed in to volunteer me. We'll start with the classic Amir Rand stretch. So everybody stand up. Amir, why don't you demo this one, buddy? Why don't you demo the Amir Rand stretch for us? Get your hands on your hips. Bend back as far as you can. Come back up. Do that like 10 times. Some nice extensions. We've been sitting all day. Our discs are sitting too far backwards. We're going to push them back in place a little bit. You'll feel a little stretch in the front of your thighs. If you start feeling pain down your leg, I'm sorry, it wasn't me. Mark, looking good.
Thank you.
And now you guys can tell people this teletherapy stuff is great.
Yeah.
All right, so next I'm going to bring in a special guest. So if you have a waiter, you got like a little doggy like I do, you just take them and you can just twist and rotate. The added weight helps get a little bit to that end range. If you don't have a cute dog like me, you can just take your arms and just rotate. Do like 5 or 6 times each side, nice and slow. Should feel nice and good in your mid back. Ah, we got another dog, Simon. Love it.
Nice.
All right. And then last one we'll do, just put one on your hip, take the other arm, just reach as far over your head as you can, hold about 5 seconds, and then switch sides. And you all are great students.
Oh, thank you, Amir.
Oh man, that actually felt
Got
really
credit for it, even better.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and pick things up where we left off. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my slides. So give me 1 second here. Okay. Can people see my slides? Just give me a thumbs up if that's coming across. Okay, great. So before we move on, I do want to take a moment to debrief that last exercise. I heard a lot of really great ideas and reflections when we were talking about the change curve, specifically around where you are, the things you're noticing emotionally, mentally, things you're noticing in your teammates. I would like to focus our debrief specifically on what's one person that you want to work with personally to coach them to the next stage. Now, I heard a lot of really good ideas around who this person is on your teams and what you're noticing in them. So I'd love it if someone would like to share, maybe someone we haven't heard from too much today. What are you going to do to coach that one person through to the next stage, wherever they may be? Who would like to kick it off? Let's hear from someone new. How about Ariana? What are you thinking about when it comes to coaching a person through to the next stage? What are you going to do with that individual?
Honestly, just emotional support right now. I think that's kind of all I can do, and help everyone, you know, is stuck in their tiny apartments and trying to make this work. And I think that just being able to be there and listen and maybe sell the positives. That's it.
Yeah, no, and that may be all it is. And when you say like emotional support, what does that specifically look like for like a person on your team? What do you do? Like, what actions can you take at this point?
Well, we have one-to-one still every week. So just listening to maybe their challenges and their successes, and not trying to like over coach them, and just listen, because I think right now everyone just has to figure things out on their own, and I can't force anyone to like feel a certain way or see something from a certain perspective. So yeah, just be there to listen.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. You know, in stage 3, when they're at that lowest point, you can't force them to feel a certain way. You be present, you're there, you listen, and you'll be there when they move on from that and they start thinking creatively, hopefully, right? Let's hear from one other person. I want to hear from Lisa. Lisa, where did you map that critical person on your team, and what are you going to do with them to help meet them where they are right now?
So I have a couple people in acceptance as well. I think the person that I wanted to focus on is the person who's actually in number 5, because a lot of my energy has been emotional support and really like helping those people at number 3 and 4 kind of get up there. But I've been really thinking about the person who's calling me a lot and with ideas and like really a lot more energy than most people have around all of this. And so I want to really start to put energy into her and create and like be able to foster those ideas and get her to innovate more, because I think she's going to help others get around to where we want to be at. So that's my goal for this week, was really trying to take those ideas that she's been throwing out there and get myself around, all right, I need to meet her there. And how do we continue to give her fuel, basically? Because I think that she's going to help us kind of get out of this on the positive side versus just, okay, this is what I have to do right now and this is my life. She's really thinking out of the box. So I want to put my energy there this week.
I love that approach. Yeah, thinking of it as fueling those folks who are leading the charge. You don't just want to focus on the people who are far behind, because the people who are leading can often bring those people along by leadership, by example. So I love that approach. Don't forget about the people who are doing well. I think we often, and this is a whole other workshop, thinking about feedback, we don't want to disregard our high performers. right? They often needs even more focus and more attention to keep them as high performers, as people leading the way. So I love that thought. All right, let's keep moving because I want to keep our time up. We've got a little under an hour left in the content area, and then we're going to have a debrief discussion and talk about applications. But so far, really enjoying the thoughts and ideas and feedback that you have. And we're going to continue to have opportunities for you to chime in and share thoughts as we go into the next portion of this workshop, which is all about leading teams through change. So the change curve is about individuals. The Beckard and Harris change model is about communicating with teams. So again, a whole new set of tools that you can use to focus your change communications, right? So we're starting to think about a different part of change. How do we communicate to groups about where we're going and where we're headed? And specifically talking about vision, which I think is very critical and difficult to do in a time like this. So the Beckard and Harris change model is something that was basically designed by two researchers, Beckard and Harris, and it looks at change in a team context. And the reason I really like teaching this model is because it's wildly simple, but in its simplicity, it has a lot of power to help focus the type of work you're working on. And you let go of some of the other aspects of change planning that have a lot less of an impact on increasing the likelihood your change will be successful. So here's how it works. This is the whole model, okay? So it's very simple, very straightforward. Let me walk you through it, because for the rest of this workshop, I'm essentially gonna talk about each of these variables individually and give you tools to help you move the needle on each of these variables. So here's how the whole thing works. Essentially, it's an inequality that if the left side of this inequality is greater than whatever resistance you're facing to your change, the thought is your change will be successful, right? And the elements of this inequality are the following. There's dissatisfaction with the status quo. So this is a variable where there has to be something wrong with how things are operating currently in order to get people excited about change, right? So you have to actually appeal and discuss some of the things that are broken right now to get people motivated about doing something differently. Then there's vision, right? So there has to be some place you're going, some future state that's better than where you are right now. This is probably a particular challenge right now because this change wasn't instituted strategically, right? A reorg, a new piece of technology, a new process change, those have vision at the start, and then it's more about getting people on board. Right now, probably one of the lowest variables we have right now is vision for what the future looks like. So again, I'm going to talk about some tools for that as we go, but something to think about as we get started here. And then first steps is a variable that talks about what's the first thing I'm asking people to do to get them moving towards this change. And the way this variable works is the easier and simpler those first steps are, the higher your score. If you're asking people to do a whole bunch of work right at the beginning, this model argues, then you're actually going to reduce the likelihood of change. You want to take incremental steps at the beginning to ease people in so that they start to get momentum. And we'll talk about all these in turn. And then finally, there's resistance. Okay, so that's whatever forces are working against you or this change. It could be people, it could be technology, it could be outside factors. We'll talk about all those. We'll talk about how you sort through those to, again, reduce the impact that that resistance is having. Another thing about this model is that, as you can see, it's multiplicative. It's not just a sum, it's not just additive. So the thought there is that there has to be at least something in each of these buckets in order for the whole side of that equation to not go to zero. Because remember, fifth grade math, if you multiply by zero, everything goes to zero. So there has to be at least some sort of dissatisfaction with the status quo. It's got to be at least some element of a vision, and that first steps can't be so overwhelmingly huge that people can't do them. Because any one of those, if there's a zero in that bucket, the model argues, the change will be unsuccessful. So again, with this model, we're not going to, if there are any engineers here, we're not going to be assigning exact values to each of these variables. We're just going to be thinking directionally. So what can we do to increase it? And what can we do to reduce the resistance, right? Just directionally. We're not going to put numbers to this. It's more of a theoretical model. at a high level, does this make sense? What we're talking about here, these variables, this inequality. We're going to dive into each of these in more depth, but want to pause if there is any confusion up front. Okay, great. Let's move on. So let's look at all the variables in turn. So the first thing we want to look at is dissatisfaction. So you want to ask yourself the high-level question, what are all the ways the world is broken today? And that may be a lot larger than typically for a workshop like this. So the thinking with dissatisfaction is you want to be creative and define what is terrible about the status quo. What's not working so that we can get people excited to then change some of these broken aspects of their day-to-day work. So the thinking there is something's got to be wrong with the current situation. If people are content and happy, they're not going to be driven to make any sort of change in their life or their work. The pain of not changing has to be greater than that uncertainty of change. So the pain of keeping things the way they are has to be greater than the unknowns that are inherent anytime you make a shift. So it's important to be creative here. And by that, I mean, you want to identify things that aren't working that people may think are just part of the deal, right? So again, I keep going back to all these things that are probably broken with our day-to-day environments that this shift to remote work actually will help us think about in new ways. So a really small example I brought up earlier, conference rooms, right? If you're having meetings, now that's something that is maybe frustrating for you to find a room. Now this is an opportunity to completely get rid of that challenge. Commute hours, right? That's something that may frustrate people, the amount of time you spend in the car, on the subway, or whatever. If that's annoying to you, this is an opportunity now to fix that and get rid of that. So being creative and identifying these things that are disappointing about the status quo, that you can now say, hey, this new change, we're actually going to work on that. That's going to go away now. Now, the flip side of this is you don't want to go overboard, right? So this is a double-edged sword. You don't want to just trash everything about the status quo, especially if you're not going to actually change those things. So you don't want to just get a huge long list of disappointments and then say, oh, well, we're only going to really deal with 2 of them, right? Because people still have to show up to work the next day, and especially if the vision isn't realized overnight, which 99% of the time it's not going to be. So I am curious for you, here's a question for the group. I'd love to hear from 1 or 2 people on this. What's something that's broken today that people might not realize is up for debate or up for change? Or, flip that question around. What's an opportunity we have now that didn't exist prior to the crisis, right? What's something that we can now kind of upend that maybe we had never thought could change about our normal work life? So what do you think? What's an opportunity here of something that's broken that we could address with some of our changes? I'm going to call on it. How about Greg? I'd love to hear from Greg.
Sure. This has forced my whole office to go digital, which I didn't think would ever happen. So, we had about half and half of people that were fine being digital and people that still carried around giant 11x17 job jackets. So, it was a nice change. Though I'm sure on the other side, people are not loving it. So,
Right, but so when you say go digital, they're carrying around 11x17 planners. Like, what else does that look like? That was status quo prior to this.
There was a lot of the way that our routing system worked, especially with proofreading, is that everything had to be printed out. You had to approve paper changes. There was a lot of chance for it not to be looked at. But rather now, good or bad, hard to tell, is it's forcing everyone to kind of work within the tools that our clients work in. So it's a nice change from that respect.
I like that. Yeah, it forces you to kind of meet your clients on their level if you're using the same tools there. I see in the chat, Elise is talking about cleaning up our CRM and internal systems. Elise, was that up for debate earlier, or has this kind of sparked that into action?
No, this is something we're actually, we were moving at such a fast pace that we weren't getting to critical projects. And so we were actually barreling through and ignoring, I think, a lot of our processes that needed to be fixed. So this has been a blessing in disguise in many ways, because it's forcing us to hit pause and be really thoughtful about how we set ourselves up for the other side of this.
Yeah, I love that. And I think with a lot of these things like processes, team operations, I talk to a lot of clients and they're really re-examining a lot of those tools that they use and the ways they gather now, because this has forced some of those rickety operations that maybe were held together with Scotch tape and duct tape to actually say, well, no, we actually have to spend the time, and maybe we have the time now to look at that. So that's a great one. Anyone else have one? Something that maybe wasn't on the table for discussion prior to this and now we're looking at?
So one of the things that came to light for us in the PT world, so one of the, issues that we were running into is communication across the entire company, and how do we do that? And I brought this up in my breakout session. We would have an all hands meeting that would take us months to organize and getting everybody together, and we would have to close the clinics down for half the day. And I'm with Dave and Amir in the PT world, and now with these Zoom meetings, yesterday we had a town hall and the whole company can join, and it's a way for our CEO, our COO, and like key members of the organization to communicate widely all at once without having to book a meeting room and close clinics down and worrying about people being there in person. So I think it's opened our eyes into what we can maybe do going forward to increase our level of communication from our CEO and down, to just get messages across in a more effective way and in real time, versus one all hands meeting once a year, hoping to get all our messages out right away. So that's a positive, I think, that will come from this.
I think that's great. And I think I've been doing the thought experiment with clients recently and thinking about, would you have ever imagined having an all hands meeting be fully Zoom, 3 months ago? Would people think that's silly or ridiculous or whatever it is? And the answer is, yeah, this is like something that was never up for discussion, right? And we always had to have get the all hands space and get catering and whatever that is, take weeks and weeks and weeks. We can do it in a couple hours now. Really good example. So again, thinking about if we're gonna move the variable, move the score. Oh, do we have another hand? Another hand there? Okay, I thought Catherine maybe raised her hand. That was just maybe a involuntary movement. So thinking about the score, thinking about this as a variable, how do we increase the score of dissatisfaction? It's by discussing these types of examples that you just brought up, things that were never up for discussion, now they are up for discussion, things that have been annoying us for weeks or months or years that we just assumed we'd have to just suck up and deal with it. Those are all on the table for discussion now. Those are some of the exciting things about dealing with those status quo dissatisfactions, that again, the more of those you bring up that are up for debate, the more you'll increase the score of this variable, and the more you're ultimately going to increase the likelihood that your change is exciting and invigorating and will be successful, right? So it's a big open question for you to continue to think about as you're using this model for change communications. Let's keep moving. So the next variable is vision. And with vision, there's a lot of different ways to tackle this. I like to think about vision as something where what parts of this vision are up for debate, where I'm going to accept new ideas from people on my team for where we'd like to go, and what parts of this vision are actually not up for debate, that are set in stone, that I'm going to have to say no and block those ideas from people. Because the idea here is, with a vision, you want to co-create as much of that vision as possible with your teams. And so the challenge there is, what types of visions are really exciting? A great vision paints a picture of what people's day-to-day lives will be like, once the change is complete. So it's simple in the sense that people can understand it easily and can communicate it to their colleagues without messing it up or changing it, like a big game of telephone. It's consistent and it's motivational, right? So it gets people excited about where we're going, and it gets people excited about doing the work to get there, because it's worthwhile work, because they understand how their lives will be improved. It's also really helpful to think about triggering a useful amount of emotion with that vision. typically I talk about with a classic types of changes like a reorg or a merger or an acquisition, there's an emotion around getting rid of some of the processes or requirements that you don't like doing anymore. Or there's some positive emotion around having more resources to support you. Or maybe there's fewer decision makers in a decision-making process so things can get done faster. Now, I think about with this change to remote work, what's this vision look like of the future where you're spending maybe when things kind of go back to normal, you're spending 2-3 days at home. What will that allow you to do? It'll allow you to spend more time with your family and kids. It'll reduce the amount of time you spend commuting. It'll allow you to fix your working hours at times that work better for you rather than just a standard, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. So some of those emotions and using it in proper amounts to say your life will be easier, less stressful, more exciting, you'll be able to personalize more, being smart about how you appeal to those emotions that, again, allow people to connect with that vision on an individual personal level and not just have it be corporate speak and just say, these operations will change, you'll be great. And finally, what's really critical about talking about a vision and increasing that score is understanding where the finish line is. And to me, this is the most challenging part of the moment we're in as it relates to this work from home situation or this pandemic as a whole. It's very unclear where the end is and where the finish line is. And when I work with organizations, a lot of organizations talk about this idea of change fatigue. You may be in one of those organizations where people complain one change leads to the next, leads to the next. We're constantly shifting and adjusting it, and I'm getting exhausted. It never feels like we're done. What I coach people to do there is, even if there are 10 changes happening over the course of a year, at the end of each one, mark it, explain that we've reached a finish line or a milestone, celebrate it, take a moment to live in that celebration, and then you can move on to the next change very quickly, but you want to draw those finish lines so it doesn't feel like you're on this hamster wheel of change. And I think that's how we may feel right now because there isn't a clear finish line. The more you can break up these changes into smaller individual pieces, the more you're going to create that finish line effect, and the more you're going to have opportunities to celebrate reaching milestones along that vision, as opposed to now where it feels like there's this kind of endless sea where you look out. And I was joking with my brother the other day, he's running a webinar himself. And I'm like, I look ahead to the future and it's just webinars all the way down, so there's really there's no finish line that you can see sometimes. Creating one, even if artificially, really powerful. And so with this, you want to think about what's a part of this future state, this vision, that you're going to actually want to ask your teams about to get their ideas. And so, Lisa brought up a really good point earlier. She wants to empower this person who's leading the charge with more ideas. And so with that person, you want to think about what's a clear part of this vision that I can give to them to think creatively about. And that way I can empower them to share new ideas with me and empower them to share new ideas that we actually have a chance of implementing, as opposed to just saying everything's up for debate when in fact it isn't all up for debate. And if you get people sharing ideas in areas or topics that they can't actually affect, it's going to have a negative effect. You might as well have not even asked them in the first place, because then you're going to have to say no to a lot more ideas, and it's going to reduce the buy-in that they have to vision. So the critical thing you want to do is figure out what's up for discussion, and then what's already been decided about your vision, and clearly communicate where the dividing line is so that you solicit new ideas in areas that people can affect. And you clearly say, no, I won't accept ideas in these other areas because they're not up for discussion. Again, that dividing line may shift a lot day to day right now, but it's important to be clear communication-wise where the dividing line is. So when I say something like that, for your changes right now, can you think of an area that you would like to get people's ideas in? And where's the dividing line? Like, where will it stop and where will people run into maybe policy or something that is something you can't affect change in right now? How will you know where that dividing line is when you ask for thoughts from your team? Does that question make sense? So I'll ask here, I'll go to Joe. Joe, what's an area that you're looking for ideas from your team on in terms of the vision?
Yeah, so actually I think I'm going to use an example of we were in the middle of changing this whole process prior to COVID hitting. But in physical therapy, we have if anything, any appointment was canceled under 24 hours, we had a $40 cancellation fee. We collected maybe 15% of that. It was more of like an empty threat. And so we realized that it was creating tension not only between us and the patient, but also between team members, because, they would call in, the front desk would say, well, it's really up to your therapist. Or the therapist would say, well, talk to the front desk about it. And so it was creating this tension between roles as well as between us and the patient. So we actually started implementing, or the idea was to implement a social contract where the therapist was asking for commitment to showing up to their scheduled appointments on time and ready to go. And it was a contract that we created. It was called the Back to Life Agreement, which is our slogan. And the therapist and both the patient would both sign this contract committing to being 100% into therapy. A lot of the resistance was, the therapist thinking, well, that's not my job to implement a cancellation fee. And a lot of the conversations that we had to have was like, listen, you're already doing it. You're already getting this commitment. Yeah. We're just taking out that payment portion of it. And it was just about who's having the conversation instead of what the actual conversation was. So there was a lot of different ideas that we had to accept. How do we implement it? And how do we make sure that it's happening throughout the organization? And how do we frame it to make it sound like it's in the best interest of everyone?
Yeah, well, I love that example because it hits on both of the variables we just talked about, right? Here's this broken point in our process that we're not doing the best way possible, collecting these fees, discussing these fees, sharing these fees. How are we going to implement this new policy? Who's going to talk? How are we going to get people bought in? That's where the vision portion comes in. So it's like, what's up for debate is how do you have these conversations? What's not up for debate is that you're now going to be doing these contracts, right? So we're not, that's not for discussion, right? We're doing it. So how do we do it best? And then you can get good ideas.
Exactly. So we actually beta tested it in my region first and then Lisa's region after that to try to gain some best practices in the conversation, and then created a one-pager and started having training and coaching conversations with all therapists for about a month. And we were supposed to go live yesterday on this, but other circumstances have taken effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, well, implementation is later, right? We're just thinking about how we can communicate this change right now. So that's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that one.
You're very welcome.
So with vision co-creation, I always like to show this diagram, which talks about what you get out of soliciting people's ideas. I use the term yes-anding ideas because I'm an improviser at heart, acknowledging people's ideas and building on them when they come to you with ideas for the vision. And then also, what do you get and also lose when you say no, right? When you say, no, this is going to happen. We have to do it this way. So when we think about the value of co-creation, you get a lot out of it. What we just kind of discussed, right? You get new ideas, there's adventure, there's new energy in the conversation. It feels inclusive. So people see their ideas being listened to and implemented, and people feel bought in to make sure that that solution is successful. Now, the flip side is there's also a lot of costs to co-creating a vision. First and foremost, it takes a lot of effort, right? It's a lot easier to come up with a plan on your own and then just tell people to do it, at least in the planning stages. When you actually have to listen to people, get their ideas, come up with a way to organize those ideas, share them back to people, there's a little more effort, a few more steps there. So it's not going to be as cut and dry as maybe just deciding on your own or with your leadership team. And part of that is you're going to have to let go of control, right? Maybe the ideas that your team comes up with aren't exactly what you would do, and maybe aren't exactly what you would like to be done. But if the whole group is really excited about it, you're going to have to make a trade-off decision. Do we go with this crowdsourced idea essentially? Or do we go with an idea that maybe there's less support for, but I feel more strongly about? There can create a little tension there for you and your leadership team that's worth working through. And sometimes that can make you feel weaker as a leader delegating these things. And that's a whole other conversation around delegation, but it is essentially delegating to the group where you'd like to go. Now, that can also lead to great outcomes, which is the kind of value there, but something to note. And you can go really far, really fast. So essentially, one of the costs of yes-anding and co-creation is you can go beyond the scope of what you're actually there to discuss. So you may have to rein it in sometimes. Now, there's value to saying no, right? There's value to telling people, no, the boundary is here. We've decided this vision already. And what you get out of that is you avoid risk, right? You avoid some of the risk of doing something outside of what you believe is the right thing or the perfect thing. And you also, it can stop what I'll say, unwelcome adventure, right? So you keep boundaries within a certain context. So you're not discussing topics that aren't the topic you want to discuss that day. And the value when I talk about creating drama is really what I mean by that is you can create some constructive conflict. So if someone comes up with an idea for a future state, right? Let's say talking about the earlier example of updating the CRM processes. If someone has an idea for also updating your email systems, you could say, well, okay, no, we're not going to discuss that, but here's why. We've already gone through this process. We've already looked at that. Here's some extra context that maybe you didn't know that explains why I'm saying no to you. So it's a little educational opportunity. And then finally, there's costs to saying no that we all probably know at this point, right? Takes energy out of the room, you disrupt that flow. And ultimately, people don't love hearing no to their ideas. So you really want to be clear, here are the types of ideas I'm looking for, and here are the types of ideas I'm not looking for. So don't give me those ones I'm not looking for because I'm going to be forced to say no to them. So don't even start with them. So it kind of skips that step of the process, ideally. So the question for you is to think about what's a small part of this change that you can carve out for your team to co-create ideas and solutions. And where's the dividing line? You know, what's off limits? What do you not want new ideas in? What's already been decided maybe at a higher level than them? And how are you going to know when to yes and build on people's ideas and when to say no? Like what criteria are you giving yourself? And the follow-up is essential. If you're going to co-create the vision, you have to have a process to make sure that your team's ideas are actually implemented in the end decision. You can't just say yes in a meeting and then not do it. You may as well have not even had that conversation in the first place. So I'd love to hear from someone new. If we're thinking about this change, what's an opportunity for co-creation? What's still up for debate? What's something that we need new ideas on as it relates to, you know, working from home or process change or anything? Because there's a million different places we could kind of jump in on that. Does anyone have an idea? What's something you want ideas from your team on? What do you think? Here, I'll go ahead and I'll ask someone. How about Jen? Jen, what do you think? What's an area you're looking for ideas from your team in terms of where to go?
I think, you know, mostly we're looking at ideas and how to improve. So I work at a strategic marketing and communications agency. And we do have a graphic design studio. And I think a lot of it is around how the workflow goes in and out of that studio. And I work with Greg, so full disclosure, he and I feel the same way about how this has forced people to go digital. And I think now that it has, I'd like to open that conversation into keeping it digital, not necessarily when we go back to the office work, you know, in a work from home way, but, you know, eliminating perhaps, you know, all the printing and all the stuff they thought they had to use, but now realize they don't need it and we're using it more as a, well, this is the way we always did it conversation. So it's really to find out how this new way of working did work versus, you know, going back to the same old.
Yeah, and I like that because it's almost like saying, hey, how do we keep the things that we've come up with on the fly and make them more permanent, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Yeah, like keep the good stuff and keep the forward thinking and keep things moving forward instead of going backward.
Yeah, no, I love that. He just stepped away. I was going to ask, let's try on someone else. How about Andreas? What's something that you're looking for ideas from your team in terms of direction or vision?
I was thinking of talking with the users for the new software that we just rolled out, of ways of sharing experience, tips, tricks, cool features that they discovered. So yeah, I'm looking forward to does it make sense to have a forum or something set up to exchange things they learned that they feel everybody should know in a way that's not overwhelming or that's actually helpful. So that's an area.
And what's the software that you just rolled out?
It's a new customs, we changed the software we're using for customs clearance. So we had an in-house solution and now we moved to an off-the-shelf solution because we really can't maintain the in-house solution anymore. We have a single developer who can maintain it, who's reaching retirement age, and customs, as you're aware, with all the tariffs, is a very fast changing business at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that'd be really interesting and making sure you're clear with folks. It's like, these are the types of processes you want to hear about, and here are the ones that we've determined you got to use it this way, right? So it's clear what the kind of focus of that forum could be. I think that's a really good idea. Anyone else have something that they're actually really excited to ask their team for ideas on in terms of vision or where we're going? What do you think?
You can choose some of those people without videos too, like Zach or Kate or Paul.
Yeah, here, let's hear from Zach. I was chatting with Zach earlier. Zach, what's a part of the vision you want to leave open for a team to co-create or crowdsource some ideas?
One thing I'm kind of excited about is, so one of the places people I work with, we're in private equity, and he travels a lot to go to conferences, and a lot of both the deal flow we find and things to invest in and the meeting of new investors is through his social skills. And so that aspect of the business has come to a complete halt. So I'm interested in discussing with him, like, how we're gonna have that aspect of the business like online, because this is the kind of thing where people are giving millions and millions of dollars, so it's usually not done that way. Mm-hmm. But like, we could reach out to people we know to see. I'm just thinking we could create like get-togethers like on Zoom to discuss deal flow, or just reach out to people specifically. We've never done that before. So that could be something that actually saves a lot of time and money, and it's just as effective. I know that he really likes traveling, so he probably wouldn't want to ultimately do that, but for the time being, it could be useful.
Yeah, and I think especially, I love that example because it's especially tied to an individual. So you're going to need that individual's buy-in. So the ideas ideally would come from them initially anyway.
Yeah.
That's great. So I think, again, the point here before we move on, figure out where that dividing line is. Where do you need ideas from people and where do you not need them? And clearly communicate what's up for debate and what isn't up for debate, so you avoid that friction of having to say no a lot for things that you already knew were decided. That's kind of the mindset I want you to have when thinking about co-creating a vision. All right, let's move on. We got two more variables, and then we're going to wrap up this class and hear from you in terms of applications. So the second to last variable is first steps, and that's all about communication planning. So when it comes to first steps, remember what we're trying to do is minimize the amount of effort people have to do first. Because the easier that first step is, and this is where that research comes in from Beckard and Harris, they looked at the first thing that you ask people to do is monumentally more important than steps 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because if you get them bought in from the initial ask, they're going to be a whole lot more willing to do the work along the way to get this change completed. So when it comes to communications, I think it's really important to have a communication plan. And this, again, is something that's going to be dynamic. It's going to have to change, but having it laid out all in front of you allows you to think about, did I miss anyone? And is everyone getting the messages that I need them to get? So here's a sample communication plan I'd like us to look at. So this is for a hypothetical reorg. So again, it's kind of oversimplified, but I want to walk you through the columns that show what does a good change communications plan include. So the first thing is you want to think about what are all the audiences that need to hear from me. And again, this may be all of the teams in your organization at this point, especially if it's the change that is touching everyone. But for this reorg, you know, there's only a handful of teams. There's the managers of affected teams, there's all the teams, there's the individuals on those affected teams, and then there's the rest of the company. There's probably going to be more for you right now. But the key thing is you want to list all of them and make sure you don't miss anyone, because it's a whole lot harder to add someone midstream than it is to just think of those groups from the jump. Then discuss what is their role, right? Who is doing a lot as part of this change and who's sort of along for the ride. It's important to understand that because their role and the amount of effort they have to do in that role is going to determine their communication needs. So for people who are critical to a change, like in this sense, you know, the managers of teams being reorged, they're going to need one-on-one meetings with you, the change leader, maybe for an hour each, right? Because you really want to make sure they're on board, you get their questions answered, they're feeling like they're getting that connection with you. Whereas, you know, maybe individuals on other teams, they just need one group meeting or one message, or in the case of the rest of the company here, one long email, maybe 2 weeks ahead of this change, in order to just be aware, but they're not actually critical, so you don't need to spend your effort there. And then make sure you know who's in the group so you don't miss anyone. And finally, the last critical part of a comms plan, change comms plan, is the what's in it for me's. I call those the talking points, but really they're the quotes of what's in it for me. I think it's really important to think about it from that perspective. And by that, I mean, what's in it for that group? What do they individually or as a unit get out of this change? And it's important to think a couple ways about these. One, think selfishly on their behalf. What do they get? How is their life better, easier, more efficient, more fun if we reach this vision? So in this case, you know, the managers of affected teams, they get better access to leaders and faster response times from those leaders. That's very different than the benefits that the individuals on those teams get, which is their roles are clearer, their responsibilities and work products are clearer. It's the same change, but different audiences have wildly different views on what's in it for them. And I think what's important about that is to think about how am I going to make sure that the what's in it for me stay consistent from beginning to end? Because if you promise someone something and then don't deliver it, you have failed. Essentially, you failed as a change leader in your change communications. And the next time you do a change, people aren't going to trust you and they're not going to believe that these benefits are coming. And the other big thing I keep hitting on this is think about it from their perspective. What do they get? Why is the world going to be better for them? Don't give them high-level company-wide talking points because they're not going to care, right? Be as specific to their role as possible and as selfish, and I'm using selfish not in a pejorative sense, but truly in a what do they get for themselves out of this change. So when it comes to figuring this out, what I really encourage you to do is start to come up with your own change comms plan for the different audiences that you touch. And think about it like this. What are all the groups affected by your change? And for this case, it may be everyone. So you may want to start at that high level. You may not be directly communicating with them for the remote work challenge. But again, think of everyone. And then what is their role? How critical are they to making this change successful? And then think about what are they going to get out of a successful vision being realized? Why is the end state better for them as an individual person? And if you can do a really good job of coming up with those what's in it for me's and you communicate them consistently and regularly throughout this change, you're going to engender so much trust in that team when you actually deliver those benefits once you reach the finish line. If those shift and change and it's unclear, you're not going to get that benefit at the end and you're going to lose the trust. So you may as well have not even thought about, trying to come up with what's in it for me's because essentially you didn't deliver them for people. So I would ask the group right now, thinking about the change you're bringing to the table today, what's a particular audience and what do they get as individuals out of a successful change? What's in it for them to make sure that they support this change as it's rolled out or as it's realized? What do you think? Here, I'll go back to, how about Julia? Julia, what's an audience when you're thinking about this change that is going to get something specifically for them? What's a benefit that they're going to realize?
You're asking specifically, right? For a problem that I'm
Yeah.
through.
Yeah,
So
like a group or
we often ask our team about different clients that they would like to work with. So, you know, who should we be targeting? Who should we be trying to get a project with, or, you know, become their agency for? And inevitably people bring up brands that we just as an agency don't want to work with. Often salty snack brands, or, you know, Little Caesars was up for a review at the end of last year. It was like, we've got to get them. And we're like, guys, we work with Weight Watchers. We're all about health and wellness brands and building those up. And it just kind of goes very much against our values. But when we sort of dive deeper into, you know, these lists that people come, you know, team members come back to us with around, we want to work with these types of brands. I try and sift through to figure out what the core rationale that ties all of those brands together really is. Often it's, these brands have done great things creatively in the past. And so from the creative team side of the table, it's, I'd get awesome work for my book. It'd be really fun to work on this kind of a brand. Everybody knows this brand. They do a lot of TV advertising. Everybody would see them. Sometimes it's a slightly different mix, right? It's a more challenging kind of a brand that might be a turnaround. We can help them come back to the forefront. So when we sort of flipping that down the journey, when I come back to the team and I say, okay, we have an RFP for XYZ brand, I'm really excited about it. I have to really position that presentation of information in a very specific way that talks to those trigger points.
Right.
They've done terrible work in the past and they hate it. They are looking for a totally new change, a totally new approach. We have a real opportunity to break the mold here. They like their work, but it's not working. We have a really big impact, can have a really big impact on their bottom line business. Yeah. That means, you know, that this is an account that's going to pay our bills and we're going to be fine with that, but let's make it work. Let's do what we know we can do. So for me, it's not really related to this current situation, but it's tailoring the speech, I guess, I'm giving to the audience and how they'll best receive it. Because in my role, especially, I need people to be excited to work with me on things. It's usually piling on top of their regular responsibilities. And so I find people are willing to help when it's exciting and it can help them in some way.
Yeah. And I love that approach, right? It's not necessarily this change we're talking about, but it's tailoring your message so people get their needs fulfilled.
Yeah.
And you got to know their needs before you can tailor that message. And that's part of your job as a leader here, is understanding what they'll care about as it relates to the new world, which is really, really great, regardless of whether it's a change or just normal new business acquisition.
Right. It's sort of collecting what those needs are by group. And then often even deeper by individual, based on how closely I work with them throughout the whole experience.
Yeah. And that approach, that process will serve you normal day to day, and especially in a change if you've done a good job collecting it, so that when you are in the emergency situation like we are right now, you know, person A really struggles with their commute, right? 3-hour commute, versus person B, they have a lot of kids, right? So they're going to want to think about these challenges and how working from home I know now is a little more challenging, but they're going to have different needs that you want to speak to and appeal to individually.
Yeah.
Cool. So again, we can keep generating these things. Again, the takeaway here before we move to our last variable and before we move to wrap up is just like we were talking about in that last conversation with Julia, it's you have to know what people care about before you can serve to satisfy their needs on a self level. And tailor the message. Don't come up with your generic comms brief and just blast it out to everyone. Go meet with people. Again, going back to the idea of meet them where they are. Critical people, meet one-on-one. Less critical people, spend less time with them. Come up with a way to focus your time and energy on the people that matter most. And with those audiences, tailor the message so it hits them home with their needs and wants. Don't genericify it thinking it's fair to give everyone the same bullet points. It's not only is it not, fairness is not what we're looking for. We're looking for effectiveness. And to get effective buy-in, you got to appeal to the self. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep moving. We got our last variable here, which is resistance. That's on the other side of our inequality, right? So the three variables we just talked about, dissatisfaction, vision, and first steps, those are all variables working on our behalf, things we want to increase the amount of so we can generate excitement and buzz and motivation to do the work. Resistance is everything pushing against us. And with resistance, I like to take the mindset, what can go wrong will go wrong. So let's think of all the things that can go wrong and start to develop plans, mitigation plans ahead of time. So in order to combat resistance, it's got to be less than the product, let's say, of all the other variables. And so resistance can come from a lot of different places. For your particular change, you probably already know where these major sources of resistance are coming from. The most common source of resistance in any workplace change is people. So we talked earlier, I think it was Greg mentioning digitization is something that's come out of this change to remote work. There were probably individuals or groups of individuals who resisted that very strongly over the last months and years, right? So thinking about who are these people I'm gonna have to worry about, who are the groups that are not gonna wanna take this change, and write them down and start to think about a strategy. I'm gonna give you that strategy in a moment, but first we're just generating sources of resistance. A process can be a source of resistance. So thinking about a technology process or an approval process or a process you typically use for generating new business. Zach brought up a really good example of a resistance source that's a process, right? His biz dev guy loves to get on a plane and go meet with people in person and schmooze, right? So that's a process that's been broken by working remotely and by social distancing. That's a source of resistance that he's trying to figure out. How do we deal with that? Relationships, you know, a change forces relationships to shatter or to new relationships to form that maybe we're not as comfortable with. I think a huge source of resistance right now is not being able to see our friends and colleagues face to face. That is a source of resistance. Relationships being stretched thin right now because all we're seeing are screens. That is something we want to acknowledge. It's a source of resistance to remote work. Physical or location obstacles. That's obvious right now, but it's also true, especially when teams are moving locations, when there's distance between organizations, when there's virtual communication that's required to connect with people, that can be a source of resistance and friction. And finally, technology can often be a source of resistance. You know, you're having a Zoom meeting and all of a sudden your internet goes out. You know, that's happened to me before, not great. People not understanding how to use the tools, not being comfortable. We talked earlier about teaching parents or loved ones how to use Zoom and how to connect virtually. Learning new technology in response to a change can be a source of resistance. Some people really do not like to learn new stuff or new systems. So I could go on and list these out, but the important thing is, what do we do once we've identified all of these potential sources of resistance? Here's the tool I'll give you. Yeah, Mark has a good one. Adding culture to the list of resistance, right? So ingrained cultures, I think that's a really good one to call out too. The tool I like is a pre-mortem. So I am curious, who here has done a post-mortem before, right? Just give me show of hands. You've done a post-mortem on a project, right? That's pretty normal. I'm curious, has anyone here done a pre-mortem before? I see some heads shaking. Yeah, essentially it's flipping that idea on its head. So a pre-mortem is essentially where you and your team imagine that a project has failed. It's an imaginary failure. And then you work backwards to understand why that imaginary failure might have happened. So it's like taking a postmortem and flipping it on its head. So you're doing the postmortem before the project has even kicked off. And that has a couple of benefits. It's really valuable because one, there's still time to address concerns and make changes to the plan, right? Because it hasn't even happened yet. Two, when you do this thought exercise, you actually shake out some creative ideas that come out of flipping a problem on its head time-wise. So you can actually come up with some ideas that, oh, maybe this was a cause of a potential disaster. Here's an idea how we would mitigate that ahead of time. And what that does is it creates some landmarks and checkpoints. So you can start to say, all right, if we start to notice this particular behavior happening, that's an indication that we may be headed towards one of the imaginary failures we came up with on our own. So let's create some plan Bs and backup plans if we start to notice those warning lights going off. And it's nice because this is informal. It's a creative exercise, right? So it allows you to use your gut and imagination as opposed to formal analysis. There's still a place, obviously, for formal analysis, you know, strategic planning and all that, but this allows you to kind of think creatively and outside the box and come up with potential disasters that your normal planning didn't identify. And the last one, which I think is particularly helpful, is this is an opportunity to bring in some of those individual resistors and allow them to vent their most wild and outlandish fears, get them written down, get them acknowledged, and at least have a place for them to share that feeling or thought. You don't have to totally upend your plan, but you can basically say, all right, that's something that could happen. It's less likely. If we do see that starting to happen, we can actually discuss a plan now so you feel confident and a little more comfortable that we've at least heard your concerns. Again, don't upend your plan, but it is a good outlet for that person that you may be tiptoeing around. Instead, bring them all the way in through this thought exercise and allow them to share that gut instinct or that fear, because it may actually lead to some interesting thoughts or ideas. And this is doing that in a controlled way. So I am curious, with this pre-mortem, does anyone have people right now thinking about their change that are those ultimate naysayers that you could see maybe bringing in through a thought exercise like this to hear some of their thoughts, hear some of those concerns, and kind of vent them in a constructive way? Anyone thought of that? It's fair if you don't. It's a kind of a newish kind of thought. So let's do this. I want to wrap things up and get to our debrief. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for being such a great group to work with, kind of listening in on the breakout groups, sticking with us through a virtual session. I know this can be daunting and it's a lot of talk and a lot of listen, a lot of it in front of your computer. So I really appreciate the focus and energy people brought to the table today. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. So I want to recap what it is we came here to do, right? We talked about, remember, the change curve, meeting people where they are, understanding the behaviors that indicate what stage of change they're at, and understanding what type of coaching is most applicable and most appropriate depending on the stage they're in, right? So we did that exercise at the end. Where are your team members? What are you going to do to coach them? Then we talked about the Beckard and Harris change model, talked about the inequality, the variables you're trying to move upwards, dissatisfaction with the status quo, vision, and easy first steps. And then also talked about resistance, right? How can we think of potential disasters ahead of time and adjust our plan? And then ultimately, my question for you now is, how are you going to apply these tools to your changes right now? And that's the question I want to open up the group towards right now. So I am curious. I'd love to hear from a couple of people in this group setting. What specifically did you learn today? And what tools are you going to apply to your team? And then zoom back all the way to our first discussion, which was, what is your goal for the day? Did you achieve your goal? Or do you have additional questions that we can discuss now before we break up as a group? So take a moment to reflect on that. And then if someone would like to share, otherwise I can call on some folks as well.
So I like the idea of the change curve and thinking through what we're going through right now in that way. I didn't really put the words behind all the emotions that we're all experiencing, and I think that does in a good way. And so I like the, like when we got to the new normal, the question you posed was, what have you learned about yourself and your work by kind of going through this change? And it's something maybe not everyone's ready to answer quite yet, but it's something I want to bring to my group of people. And because we're very much a growth mindset organization, like what did we learn from these, like from what we've had to go through? And it's a question that I don't think I've asked yet of my direct reports. So I'm interested to find a time, maybe it's not this week, but maybe it's next week, once we settle a little bit more, and to be able to ask that question and really learn from them also, and help us all realize that we can all learn in this moment to be better in the future.
Yeah, Lisa, I love that. I think asking that question at the right time is going to be such a powerful discussion. And, you know, maybe that discussion stretches over beyond a meeting, you know, because different people will be at different stages. It could be something you keep coming back to as well in different formats, one-on-ones, team meetings, large group discussions. It's a great one. Awesome. What else? What's something someone wants to take away from today, and how are you going to apply it? That's really what I'm curious about.
I really love the post-mortem idea. I'm an eternal optimist, and I'll turn my video on, sorry. I'm like walking in place and don't want everybody to see me like bouncing back and forth this entire time. But I love the idea of the post-mortem because I am very annoyed by the naysayers, and I find myself avoiding them even though they bring up great points, because I don't want to hear how they oppose at every corner or at every turn. So I think that's a really productive way to trick my optimistic mind into welcoming that advice in a productive way.
Yeah, I love that. Like thinking about, I'm an optimist. I want this to go well. I don't want to deal with these people who are just dragging us down. The nice part about having that conversation is you get them to say their fear, and then you get an agreed upon response to that fear. And so it creates a little bit of a documentation or agreement that you can always go back to and say, hey, we already discussed this, right? So this fear that you keep bringing up, like we have listened and we have heard, and we've synthesized it at least to a degree. So maybe it's time to move on, right? May not always work, but at least creates a little bit of formality to acknowledging their fear.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I like the block and accept tool that you gave us today, Dave. So I see that you could say, okay, we want to hear what you have no to, but these are the areas we're not going to speculate about.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And I think the blocking and accepting is really important now more than ever, where like there's a lot of ideas in areas that we just don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So it's probably not productive for us to generate too many ideas in those areas. Let's focus on the stuff that's a little closer right now, because we can be a little more productive and implement that faster. Let's hear from one more person. What's something you got away from today? Here, let's hear from Thomas. Thomas, what's something that you learned today that you want to apply going forward? I think you're muted still.
There we go. Yeah, it wasn't working. So I like the dissatisfaction, vision, resistance model, and bringing in the naysayers early in the process, because I already see some changes that need to happen within my department now, because this whole coronavirus thing has proven that our infrastructure, or how we're set up, wasn't prepared to handle something like this. And not only do we need to prepare for it in the future, but it's also exposing that weakness has also showed us some of these changes that would give us strengths even in normal circumstances. But the way the department runs right now is it's basically it runs by branch, and not really nationally. We have some conversation nationally, but it's still very much ran on a branch level. And one of the branches, which is like the legacy branch, so to speak, is very reluctant to change. And even when we tried to implement some changes in the past, they still go about doing things the same old way. so I'm really thinking, and it was what I wanted to get out of today, was figuring out how to influence this change, especially in my position where none of these people actually report to me. It's sort of somewhat of a flat organization, also somewhat convoluted as how the reporting structure works. So this definitely, at the end of the day, this gave me a lot to work with and use for my approach.
Yeah, and I think especially when it's a little disorganized, having a framework like this can help at least you get organized and how you want to talk about it, even if how it actually gets implemented is still up for debate.
Absolutely.
Anyone else have a thought, on any of these questions, something that you learned that was new, something you want to apply right away, and what your goal was reflecting on that? Did you get what you needed out of this workshop today? Right. Cool. More coffee is needed. Here, I want to hear from one more person. Amir, let's hear your final reflections on this. What are you going to take away and start to practice?
Sure. I mean, one of my objectives was for me to confirm or get a better sense of how I'm doing to my direct reports or with my direct reports. I think as a people person, my EQ is clearly stronger when I can see body language and get a pulse or a sense of how things are going, and it's harder now. But I think going through the curve and reflecting on how I'm likely further along than those that report into me. I think I plan to sort of create new normalcy by asking, just getting back to my old way of being. Hey guys, how am I doing? What's my blind spot right now? I know things are crazy, but can I be communicating more, less, different ways? What works for you guys? And just let them vent, let them sort of share, and then just create what could be several months of this, and I think that's what I'm taking away most of, is just a real profound appreciation for where I am on the curve, and sharing that with people and getting that elephant out of the room and just being really honest about it. And hey, you could be here, and let's just talk about where we're all at so we can all appreciate everyone's emotional state around all of it. So I think just get really authentic and honest about all of it.
Yeah. I love that instinct, right? Being open and honest and transparent about where you are as a leader gives permission for other people to act the same way. And you can't get through a change without that type of emotional support, right? Because you can't be everywhere at once either. You need to trust that some of your teammates will co-coach or peer coach each other through some of these challenges day to day also, which kind of sets that tone. I really love that. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. It's about 30 minutes past the hour, 11:30 in New York time. So I will go ahead and basically say thank you again for being such an excellent group to work with. I will stick around if people have questions, but I do kind of want to wrap things up because I know it's a long session to be sitting and virtual. Obviously, a quick plug. I do these workshops for Vistage. I do these workshops for clients, and I also do a weekly free webinar called Work From Home Wednesdays, where I'm releasing new information and tips and techniques to help you and your teams deal with some of these ongoing changes and challenges. Talked about reassessing team values, talked about setting up your work environment, engaging virtual audiences on Zoom when you're presenting, and also even just dealing with kids and working with kids and other partners and spouses from home. So if you want to do that, check that out. They're on my website. And also if you want to work with me on a webinar, let me know. I'd love to chat. We do all of our content virtually. So this is one of our workshops, and I love teaching this stuff to people on Zoom. It's a little awkward sometimes, but now that we're home, I think teaching people virtually is going to become more the norm. So again, one last time, thank you. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to everyone for being so present and active and sharing and really sharing in an honest way, which is tough, especially in some of these more difficult changes we're going through. So I really appreciate your work today. And I thank you for your time.
All right, don't go away yet. Dave, thank you very much for doing this, I know virtual is a little more challenging than in person, so I'll ask each of you when you do your speaker ratings to be generous, because it is a little bit of a challenge doing it virtually. Secondly, I want to tell you that Dave has sent me the slides, so I will post the slides. You'll get each of those slides and we'll come up with a homework assignment. I encourage you to continue to meet with your triads virtually or via Zoom and use your triads to help you.
Well, will we also get the recording of this? Or
Yep, I also recorded this, so I'll send you a copy of the recording. Do you care if I give this to some people outside of your group, or do you want this just inside your group? So does anyone mind if I share this with outsiders? Because I think this content was valuable.
No, I don't mind.
Mark.
All right, good. Next, I want to ask, are you receiving my newsletter? If you're not receiving it, raise your hand, because we do have some additional events. Tomorrow, we've got an event with Dr. Rob Shire called Think, Eat, Move, Effective Leadership Principles to Create a Healthier, Happier, Stress-Less Life. On April the 7th, we have Patrick Lennon-Sony that's going to be doing a workshop on leading through crisis, just an exclusive for Vistage members that you should have received an invitation to. And then next Thursday, Barry Deutsch, who is supposed to be our speaker, is going to be doing one on leading teams virtually in a crisis state. And these are invited to all members so that you can I just read your chat. You can, you're invited to participate. So that's kind of like the wrap up that I have here. And we'll probably be doing our May meeting virtually as well, is what I am presuming. And who knows for June where we'll be, but we shall see.
Mark, can we ask here, are we still our full group?
We are. I'm going to turn off the recording. I think I can, or do you have to make me the host?
Yeah, let me make you the host again. 1 second. Okay.
Okay, and then I'm stopping recording right here.